Welcome to a royal day on Merseyside as Her Majesty the Queen travels north to open Britain's first ever garden festival and the biggest event of its kind in the world this year. Liverpool hasn't had much to cheer about lately, except maybe football successes, but here's a party that's going to last until October and which is expected to attract 3 million visitors, many of them from overseas. What are they going to see when they get here? Well, there's so much it's hard to know where to begin. For a start, there are some 30 international creations, ranging from the Yen Shu Garden, from the forbidden city of Peking, with its lovely hand-painted friezes, to the multicoloured Dutch display. There are theme gardens, including one for the thirsty, devoted to Scotch whisky, complete with piper on tap. And for gardeners and non-gardeners alike, there's all the fun of the festival, with 2 miles of steam railway, a children's exhibition featuring the TARDIS, sculpture, both dignified and daft, and much more. It's all set in a rolling, man-made landscape which meets the Mersey shore on a beautiful new esplanade. Fittingly, water forms one of the central attractions of the site, with cascades and canals, lakes and rapids. And seeming to glide on its moat, there's the marvellously graceful festival hall, the centrepiece which will remain when the party's over for the enjoyment of the city. Helping me to guide you through the highlights of the Liverpool International Garden Festival is writer and horticulturist Peter Seabrook.
Right.
Peter, you've been involved with this project for some time now.
Well, I sat in on one or two of the feasibility study meetings 2.5 years ago, and I think as an enthusiast, I've been standing on the sidelines and watching the developments in awe ever since.
Its recent progress has been quite breathtaking, hasn't it?
Oh, tremendous, yes. I mean, I've seen these international garden exhibitions in a number of European countries over the past 20 years, and it's nearly time, you know, with our reputation being the best gardeners in the world, that we had to go at it. And people have to remember, I think, that it is a 6-month exhibition. When they first come, they may say some of the beds there were, you know, a bit thin and the trees weren't in leaf yet, because the whole thing's got to grow over a 6-month period.
So things will be happening all the time?
Oh, yes. You know, you can't have 180 acres of Chelsea for 6 months. But I'm amazed, I mean, that from that desolation, we have such a marvellous site.
I think we should stress that it's not just a garden festival, is it?
No, quite the reverse. I mean, I come here as a gardener to see all the gardens, but then there's so much for children. All those nature trails and adventure playgrounds and places for the old to sit to and watch what's happening, and for the in-betweens, their ideal homes. Oh, goodness, a tremendous day out for everybody.
And lots of events, of course.
Yes, I think there's going to be theatre and laser light shows and teddy bear picnics. Yes, it just goes on and on. I think they're going to want to come, most people, for 2 or 3 occasions.
Peter, thanks. We'll talk some more later on.
Okay.
The site of the festival used to be known as the Cast Iron Shore, or Cassie for short. No one knows why. One theory is that it was named after St Michael's Church nearby, because it has a cast iron frame. In the 19th century, this area below the dingle was a privately owned garden, which was open to the public 2 evenings a week, so that they could stroll down by the Mersey here and watch the busy river traffic. As the waterborne trade declined, so dereliction claimed the Cast Iron Shore. For 30 years, it was used as a corporation rubbish tip, and next door, by the Herculaneum dock, was an oil and naphtha storage farm. Not what you might call the ideal site for an international garden festival. The transformation began in January 1982. 3.25 million tons of rubble, silt and sand had to be shifted. The methane gas produced by the buried garbage was piped out and can provide energy for decades when they finally decide how best to use it. An undulating landscape had to be created to screen off the chill wind from the river and to form the framework in which individual themes could flourish. Service roads were driven through a morass of mud. On the new esplanade, they built a pub, as plushy as an Edwardian saloon. And for when the 3 million visitors get hungry, they put in restaurants and kiosks. They planted 250,000 trees and shrubs and 500,000 bulbs to turn this once again into a riverside park, this time permanently open to the public. A great many people share the credit for the achievement, notably the workers of Merseyside, who throughout the 2-year project never lost a day through labour disputes. And the fact that it gained the coveted international status was largely due to the backing given by Michael Heseltine, who at the time was popularly known as Minister for Merseyside. Mr. Heseltine, last time you saw the area, it looked pretty much like a bomb site. What's your impression now you've had a look around?
Well, it's the most exciting thing. I suppose it's one of the largest urban reclamation schemes this century. And I think the simple way to think of it is think of the London parks. And last century, those were built very exciting, and now you have an opportunity of a similar sort of scale of activity here in Liverpool.
Do you think this will be used to that extent?
I think it will, yes. I think that after the festival is gone, there will be very considerable numbers of houses built here, very large numbers of jobs attracted on the industrial sites here, but I think a very large part of it will be kept for the people of Merseyside and Liverpool, and I think they'll vastly appreciate it. As I found walking round, the feeling amongst all the people working here, and there are hundreds of them, of course, Liverpool Pudlians, is immensely stimulating. They're so proud of what they've achieved against the clock. No one thought they could do it. They've done it.
The Festival Hall stays behind, of course. That's a stunning building, isn't it?
Isn't it? I mean, when I first saw the designs, I thought it was one of the most exciting justifications for having competitions for architecture. And I think, again, that will last as a very visual and exciting opportunity for the city.
Well, for the people who made the festival, this is the reward for more than 2 years of very hard work. The arrival of Her Majesty the Queen and His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. The Queen welcomed by Leslie Young, Chairman of the Merseyside Development Corporation, which was charged with revitalising this part of the city. This is Rodney Beaumont, the design coordinator, who can afford to be a proud man today. Queen talks to Lord Aberconway, UK Commissioner General for the festival, and Leslie Young rises to speak.
The festival is the culmination of a task of reclamation, design, construction and management of Herculean proportion. This experience, embodying such a fine spirit of enthusiasm and dedication, is something which we all will remember with pride for the rest of our lives.
And no one would argue with that. Now the Queen replies to Leslie Young's welcome.
Some people have probably wondered about the relevance of organising a garden festival in a derelict area of Liverpool. I think it is most appropriate. The wonderful feature of nature is its powers of renewal. Plants wither and die, but with the coming of spring, growth begins again. The gardens and exhibitions blooming on this site are symbolic of what we all wish for Liverpool. Furthermore, gardening has been a national occupation for centuries, and there cannot be any other that absorbs equally every section of society. The presence of so many exhibits from overseas is most heartening. It demonstrates that delight in gardens is shared by people of different races, cultures and climates all over the world. I join you in congratulating all who have given their time and energy to this project. You have created something of great value and a symbol which I am certain will bring new hope and confidence to the city and people of Liverpool.
The Queen's next task is to unveil the plaque. It's made of blue-black Welsh slate and inscribed by David Baker, a calligrapher from Hunstanton in Norfolk. This fanfare was especially written by Guy Wolford, director of the Liverpool Mozart Orchestra and musical director of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and it's played by the band of the Royal Marines, Plymouth. 2,000 balloons loosed by children from local primary schools. And a bouquet of cymbidium orchids presented by 7-year-old Helen Mapley, head girl of St Margaret's Church of England Primary School. Her father works on the festival railway. Prettily done. And as the band strikes up again, the Queen is led down from the podium. She's wearing, incidentally, a pale green fitted coat with a matching hat, and on that is a spray of lilies of the valley.
The Dutch, with their 80-foot-high windmill, have an eye-catching international garden. Strange, really, when you remember that just 2 years ago, when they were hosts to the International Festival with their Amsterdam Floriade, they said we would never build it in the time. And they sat on the fence for a full year before deciding to pull out all the stops and taking this 1,200 square metre site. And then just 6 weeks ago, the leader of their nursery industry in Boskoop was heard to say that here at Liverpool, we've got the finest International Garden Festival ever staged. And of course, the serried ranks of the most marvellous tulips, all to give way in 2 or 3 weeks' time to the summer flowering bulbs, the lilies, and the dahlias and begonias. Or if you like something a little less formal, under the trees, we've got the nodding heads of erythronium, or the windflower, anemone and muscari. But then everything that's best in Dutch horticulture is here. The trees and shrubs from Boskoop, conifers in containers and all those other attractive evergreens. And in the glass house, pot plants and cut flowers, and a calendar of events as varied as from cheese tasting to the training of British Garden Centre staff. The West German garden, showing the adaptability of plants to site and situation. And the Germans were host, of course, of the festival last year with their Munich Eiche. This year they have a collection of pines, but you have to remember that the plants have been here for a full 6 months and have another 6 months to go, and those cold winds blowing up the estuarine over the Mersey have burnt some sides of the conifers. But there are ideas for your own garden, plants for the waterside, plants to go under trees, or the more formal forget-me-nots underplanted with tulips. But the keen plantsman will have an eye for the rhododendrons because there are some very uncommon kinds and new cultivars with really exceptional flowers. Here's another eye-catcher. And just 1 week ago, the lorry arrived with 20 Italians to construct the old temple and the garden, which is very much in the old traditional feel of Italian gardening. The paths are all edged with the white marble chippings, and each bed, edged with the low box, has that lovely fragrance as you brush past it in the summer. And then the formal patterns within each hedge with the evergreen flowering azaleas. But the miracle of the site are the trees. I mean, just look at those 20-foot fastigiate hornbeams. Give those 4 weeks and you'll think they've been there for 20 years.
Only a few months ago, these terraced houses in the Dingle had one of the most dismal views in Britain, a garbage-strewn wasteland. Now it's transformed. In Liverpool's great days as a port, those streets welcomed home generations of seamen from their trips around the world. And the ships that brought them back came laden with cargo, including plants. Here, in the area devoted to Liverpool, the Seven Seas garden is stocked with plants and products which have links with the city. Exotic species share the display with more familiar fruits and flowers. Closer to home, history repeats itself with a reconstruction of turn-of-the-century seamen's houses and the little shop on the corner. The Liverpool Quiz Garden was devised by Len Cruikshank, a Toxteth community landscaper, who felt that the locals weren't involved enough. So he applied for a part to show off local skills. The Quiz Garden was designed to tell the story of the city's history and culture using design, colour, flowers, stone and murals. There'll be lots of prizes to be won here throughout the festival, including holidays for the family. For many years, jam and biscuit making have been part of Liverpool's industrial life, and the Jam Castle celebrates the fact. With its marmalade waterfall and strawberry moat, it must be the most fattening feature on the site. Well, they may have pulled down the cavern, but they've made up for it, temporarily at least, by giving the Beatles their very own maze down here by the Mersey. John Lennon's statue simply has the word Imagine on the base. There's a vivid reminder of the group's imagination in the yellow submarine here, about to take the plunge. The point about the maze is that it's shaped like a halved apple, and these green bits here double as musical notes and pips. Like some other areas, of course, it hasn't yet come into its own. It should be at its best round about June. It's fitting that the Queen should be one of the first visitors to the Beatles' maze, because of course she not only met the famous four, but honoured their music. This vessel really must be one of the oddest that Liverpool has ever seen, because although it never sailed at all, it sailed right into the history of music. And the conning tower, the Duke and the Queen and Leslie Young, pointing across now to Port Sunlight.
I'm a little over a mile from the centre of Liverpool, and what a marvellous marine esplanade to stroll down on a sunny evening and perhaps just stop and drop a glance down to one of the sunken gardens, full here with the Darwin hybrid tulips. And a little closer to the Herculaneum entrance, another sunken garden, this time with lily-flowered tulips in those lavenders, pinks and mauves, all to be stripped out in just 3 or 4 weeks' time, because in towns like Bolton and Glasgow, they're busy growing bedding plants to be set out in very intricate designs. And the first thing that hits the visitors between the eyes when they come through this entrance are 25 beds full of 300,000 tulips. Once again, they've to be stripped out and replaced with the bedding plants that were put on trial last year, just to see how the marigolds and the salvias and the begonias would stand the wind and the weather conditions here. And a little further along the grass bank, they have cut out 3 liver birds planted with universal pansies. Phil Dealey, one of the design team, was out telling the residents what they were doing here, and he said about the liver birds being cut in grass, flying off from the bank, and one of the locals said, "You can't do that. If the liver birds ever leave Liverpool, it's doomed." So he had to rush back, and the next day had the birds coming into land, and you can see them now even with the seaweed in their beak.
This is a bit smaller than the boats the liver birds are used to, but it was bigger once. When it plied the Grand Union Canal between London and Birmingham, the Staffordshire knot was a proud 72 feet long. Then they chopped her in the middle and joined up the 2 ends. In her heyday, she'd probably have had a butty boat behind her. And within living memory, there's a record of a family bringing up 14 children in the 2 cabins. The Staffordshire knot is one of the most attractive features of the Homes and Gardens section of the festival, and a reminder that Britain's next garden festival will be in Stoke-on-Trent in 1986. Behind the boat is a dapper little lockkeeper's garden, with sweet peas at the back there under the canes, a lavender hedge, with spring onions, and a rather unusual cat to keep off the birds, with fruit trees and tulips and primulas. It's all in present rural contrast with its posh brick neighbours across the road. This one has to be the top of the range, a 4-bedroom executive house with 1 or 2 little extras for the family that has everything. There's a 2-floor conservatory, a jacuzzi in the swimming pool outside, a sauna inside, 8 conventional fountains, and one that looks like a porcupine having a shower, which lights up at night. Like the other houses in this section, this one will be offered for sale at the end of the festival, and with its furnishings could fetch up to £200,000. Eventually, there'll be a whole estate here. Meanwhile, if you're on a more modest budget, what about this? No, not the whole thing, because it cunningly disguises 3 separate units. There's a 1-bedroom flat at the end, a 2-bedroomed house in the middle, and a 3-bedroomed family house at this end. When the property's sold in October, that larger one will probably go for around £27,000. Peter, at least you'd pick up this nice little summer house a bit cheaper than that. I must say, for my taste, this garden is a bit on the stern and formal side.
Well, the whole concept, first of all, is for the disabled, free movement for wheelchairs and that kind of thing. And, well, I quite like the avenue of neat and tidy conifers, you know, for those people who have a straight line and tidy mind.
But the disabled, like anybody else, like colour and scent, presumably, don't they?
Yes, but that lovely sort of curve of hedging there would encompass, you know, the more flowing cottage garden sort of effect the other side, and all that trellis. You just think getting that planted with polygonum Russian vines, honeysuckles, roses, you could soon soften all of that.
It's very ornate trellis work on the house, isn't it?
I quite like the trellis ideas, especially the upright one. Prize winners, I think, in a National Sunday Paper competition. I think
the thing in the middle was a prize winner too, wasn't it?
Tanglarium, they're calling that. It's quite clever because when you grow in a barrel, the soil at the bottom tends to get a bit wet and the top a bit dry, and that's all in sections, free draining, and very cleverly thought out.
You can actually use one at a time if you want to, can't you?
Yes, and make it much taller.
Yeah.
Well, how about the concrete topari?
Well, they're different, aren't they? But I can't say I find them very comforting. I find them a bit stern and...
Much rather have them than gnomes, me.
I'd rather have them rounded a bit, I think. I like the gardens rounded a bit. What about the red archway? Does that go for you?
I'm not sure I want it in my garden, but I quite like it. I like these, you know, really good design people having a go and sort of stretching our imagination and showing just how you can vary things. We tend to be a bit traditional gardeners, and why not change things a bit?
Well, here's tradition, but in a new form. This is an analematic sundial, I'm told. I've never heard of one of those before, have you?
No, you're sort of bemusing me with long words, but presumably you stand in the spot and tell the time.
Well, let's see if it works. What you have to do, I'm told, is stand on the appropriate month, which is May here. Look to the right. It's dead right. Good for you, Christopher Daniel.
Across the road from the Homes and Gardens feature and close by Fulwood Station and the lakeside is the Japanese garden. Totally traditional in its design and reminiscent of the 17th century Edo era. And of course the theme of all Japanese gardens is peace and tranquility, moving water. It's a kind of design that takes the eye and allows you to refresh the spirit and soul. And all of the rocks carefully selected by the Japanese landscape gardeners from a Welsh quarry. And then tremendous attention to detail in the construction and planting. Eight Japanese landscape gardeners flew in and lived on site right through the winter, working from dawn till dusk, 7 days a week, and it was fascinating to see them lower these great stones into position to the half-inch, giving instructions by sign language to the Liverpudlian crane driver, and equal attention to knotting the string on the posts and the fences like a religion. The care with which they sited and placed those Japanese azaleas to give a bold splash of colour. And then the individual small water features, like a mill wheel, with the one pool and a single camellia flower bobbing on the water. You could stand under the tea house and look out on these individual spectacles and refresh the soul. And then the tree peonies. The Japanese are building up quite an export trade for these. Great, fat, plump buds. Just give them another week to 10 days and they'll be opening 10 or 12 inches across. And the whole garden, at the end of the festival, is being left as a gift of friendship from the Japanese to the people of Liverpool. Everyone's been wondering what's inside the big exhibition hall, and in the centre are permanent displays. For example, the Florida growers, trying to develop the trade for their green houseplants, have a massive exhibit. Avenues too that you can explore through, miles and miles of it. And the big message really is the Ficus benjamina. Those are grown under shade for 6 months in Florida to get them used to low light, and then popped into containers and shipped across 16 days across the Atlantic, and then under glass here, again in shade, because they've got to get used to growing in 2% of their normal light. If a few leaves fall, then some more soon grow again under glass. And then at the end of the 6 months, we'll have plants like this in our shopping malls in towns like Croydon. At both ends of the hall, there's a continuous calendar of flower shows. This week, for example, from Israel, a veritable river of fruit and vegetables, all the different citrus, grapes, courgettes, figs, melons, sweet corn. And the Dutch, always so skilled with their arrangement, and marvellous quality of the cut flowers grown under glass. Cheek by jowl with a modest nursery from Evesham that has the finest collection of ivies. At the other end of the hall, a brand new azalea, 12 years in the breeding, and a lovely, sweet, heavy perfume on the stand from the Belgians. And those big evergreen plants in a fortnight's time off to the Chelsea Flower Show. And of course, alongside an exhibit from an English nursery with rhododendrons at their best. 10 different countries exhibiting in the International Pavilion, thanks to the hard work by the Commissioner General, Lord Aberconway and his staff. For example, luxuriant green foliage from the tropical rainforests of Western Australia, and the brilliant crimson bracts of Alpinia purpurata from Barbados, and then whipped right round the world to Singapore and its orchids, a tremendous trade in cut orchids shipped back to Europe. And you could be forgiven for mistaking the continuation of the orchid display as all Singapore, but in practice the central group is from Liverpool City. They're masters at growing these tropical plants with brilliant foliage. Even the white glory bough on the tree, alongside giant drum cactus from Egypt, and scarlet anthuriums and the orange strelitzia from the Madeira, alongside cut flowers from under glass from France.
Still with her bouquet of Cymbidium orchids, the Queen is now in the marvellous festival hall. Light, airy, spacious, and cool even on a warm afternoon. This is a stand erected by one of the most important British nurserymen, which has the biggest collection of trees and shrubs in the world. And these are very large anemones. In fact, the display in the middle measures 10 feet to the top, and yet you can see how it's dwarfed by this half dome. Outside, the Queen will head through the gardeners' bazaars to lunch in the British Pavilion, cooked especially by a Liverpool chef.
There are just two ways of getting round the festival site. One's on foot, and the other's the sensible method, on board the festival flyer. On its 4,000 yards of narrow-gauge track, which alone cost £100,000, it takes in 5 stations, including the one where I got on outside the festival hall. The locomotive pulling us now, Samson, was built in 1926, and together with its 2 colleagues, it was lent by the Romney, Hythe and Dymchurch Railway in Kent. The locos are all, incidentally, 1/3 full size. Each train has 8 carriages, which can carry up to 160 passengers. And the guards van has been specially built to cater for the needs of the disabled. What makes the journey such a delight is that it takes in so many changes of scenery. There are hills and tunnels, any number of glimpses of the Mersey, looking quite different from every viewpoint, lakes, canals and waterfalls, as well as a tremendous variety of the gardens themselves. As you relive the leisurely days of steam, you'll get surprises round every bend. A boat berthed on a hill, the SS Typhoon, an observation area overlooking the river. The sculptures, Henry Moore and Elizabeth Frink by the Festival Hall, and other humorous work all over the place, like the camel, which would have made Lawrence of Arabia's eyes water a bit, and a steam-driven alligator that comes with all mod cons.
Walk any of the paths from the Garden Cafe and it's like being in United Nations. From Canada, a scaled-down rocky landscape and rugged pines reflecting the Rockies theme. And an olive grove from Spain with 100-year-old olive stumps and the old millstone used to grind out the oil. A botanist's delight from the arid bush and the more lush-growing areas of Australia. Plants as unusual as the wattle to the rare Australian grass trees. And a modern-day floral example of the logo to commemorate Australia's 1988 bicentenary. Bold bowls of Belgian azaleas, in company with the copper-domed exotic Moorish cafe from Turkey, where typical Turkish coffee is served. Or step for a moment into old Austria and a lovely courtyard garden, where there's a happy mix between the formal and the informal. Those of you who like the cottage garden style with wallflowers and astilbes, delphiniums, underplanted with lilies, you'll be satisfied here.